Why the old rules still beat the new world. Every generation of traders arrives believing they are different, smarter, faster, better equipped, more technologically armed than the ones before. They tap their screens with algorithms at their fingertips, scanning markets in milliseconds, boasting data flows that Jesse Livermore could never have imagined. Their platforms glow with indicators, heat maps, sentiment models, order flow analytics, and the seductive promise that the right tool will finally eliminate uncertainty. And yet, remarkably, almost impossibly, they suffer the same emotional wounds that traders endured over a century ago. They chase the same illusions. They fall into the same traps. They ride the same emotional roller coasters of hope and despair. For all the progress in speed and computation, the trader's internal world remains untouched, ancient, vulnerable, unchanged. This is the paradox of modern speculation. The battlefield evolves, but the soldier does not. Fear did not improve with technology. Greed did not modernize into something gentler. Hope did not download a patch to stop distorting perception. The tools may be new, but the human mind is timeless in its weaknesses. It reacts today as it did when Livermore studied the tape under gaslight in the old bucket shops, listening for the pulse of the market as though deciphering a living language. He traded in an era of chalkboards and telegraph lines, yet the emotional architecture he navigated is the same architecture you battle each time you open a chart. Livermore understood something that most traders never fully accept. The true challenge of trading has never been the market. It has always been the trader. Prices move, trends shift, volatility expands and contracts. But the real drama unfolds within the psyche. The tug of war between discipline and impulse, between observation and projection, between process and ego. This is where battles are won or lost long before the trade reaches the stop or the target, and that is why the old rules still matter. Not because they are nostalgic, not because they belong to some romanticized past, but because they are built on the psychological physics of speculation. They describe the structural truths that govern human behavior under uncertainty. These truths did not break during the crash of 1907, nor the panic of 1929. They did not crumble during the dot-com bubble or the housing collapse. They did not disappear when markets moved from floor traders to servers, from open outcry to algorithmic routing. No revolution in technology has ever rewritten the emotional makeup of the trader. And so the rules persist quiet, firm, eternal. They stand unchanged, the same way gravity stands unchanged, regardless of whether you drop a stone from a mountain or a skyscraper. The landscape evolves, but the law remains constant. Livermore lived by these rules, not because he was old-fashioned or resistant to innovation, but because he recognized that the mind was the true variable that required mastery. He learned early that when he violated these rules, it wasn't the market that punished him. He punished himself. His greatest losses came not from lack of information, but from lack of alignment with his own principles. He saw traders on Wall Street who had the best information money could buy and yet destroyed themselves through emotional recklessness. He watched men with genius, level analytical ability crumble the moment the market moved against them. And he realized that the edge was never in prediction. The edge was in psychological clarity. Livermore refined them through thousands of trades, thousands of mistakes, thousands of silent conversations with himself as he confronted the complexity of the human mind under stress. And now, a century later, these rules remain untouched by time. Today, we will walk through them as though walking through a corridor of mirrors, each rule reflecting not just a technique, but a deeper truth about who you are when faced with uncertainty. This is not a tutorial, it is a code of being, a psychological constitution meant to outlast platforms, indicators, and trends. These are the laws that will stay beside your screen, not because they belong to Livermore, but because they now belong to you, if you choose to live by them. As you move through this journey, understand that what you are learning is not mere strategy. You are learning the architecture of mastery. You are learning how to detach from emotional traps, how to tame the ego that whispers dangerous promises, how to release the illusion of control that tempts you to predict rather than respond. You are learning to see randomness, not as a threat, but as an ally. A reminder that your job is not certainty, but probability. These 7 rules survived everything. Ticker tape, machine learning, data revolutions, bubbles, crashes, and entire generations of traders who mistakenly thought they had discovered something new. The rules remain because the truth remains. To master the market, you must first master yourself. And that is the journey we begin now. A journey through the timeless laws that shaped Livermore's destiny and will shape yours if you allow them to. Rule 1. The market is never wrong, but you might be Jesse Livermore, had a way of distilling complexity into a single sentence sharp enough to cut through ego. His words weren't poetic, they were precise, forged from experience rather than theory. And among all his principles, there was one that carried the weight of a hammer-striking stone, a truth so absolute that it has outlived every innovation in market technology. The market is never wrong, opinions often are. He said it without softness, without apology, without the slightest concern for how it might bruise the pride of the listener. And he meant every syllable. This rule is not merely a statement, it is a mirror. When you hold it up to your trading, it reflects back the parts of yourself you would rather not see, the parts that want to blame the market for your losses, the parts that cling to predictions long after price has moved on. The parts that treat every tick as an affront to your intelligence rather than a message about your misalignment. The market doesn't betray you. It doesn't attack you. It doesn't rebel against your expectations. What it does is reveal you. A loss is not the market's failure. It is your refusal to accept what the market has already declared. Livermore knew this intimately. He had watched thousands of traders crumble under the weight of their own certainty, stubbornly holding positions not because the market agreed with them, but because their ego demanded vindication. They weren't fighting price. They were fighting themselves. When you lose, you are not punished for being wrong. You are punished for staying wrong. Livermore understood that the market is a force of nature. It cannot be reasoned with or persuaded. It doesn't care about your analysis, no matter how meticulously constructed. It doesn't care about your favorite indicator, your perfect confluence, your years of experience. It doesn't care about the hours you spent studying or the confidence you carried into the position. It doesn't care about your hopes, your fears, or your fragile desire for the world to reflect your predictions. The market does what it does. Your job is to respond, not resist. This is the first rule because it strikes at the heart of what destroys most traders, the belief that the market should behave in accordance with their expectations. This belief is the root of frustration, the seed of emotional collapse, the birthplace of revenge trading. When price moves against them, amateur traders interpret it as injustice, as sabotage, as evidence that the market is irrational. But the market is never irrational. It simply does not care about the narrative you constructed in your mind. Livermore saw that resistance to reality is the most expensive psychological habit a trader can possess. The more you cling to your opinion, the more you suffer. The more you argue with price, the more chaotic your mind becomes. The more you try to force the market to validate your analysis, the further you drift from the truth that trading is not about being right, it is about being aligned. When you internalize Livermore's rule, something begins to shift inside you, quietly but profoundly. You stop arguing with price. You stop treating the chart as a debate. You stop demanding that the market conform to your beliefs. Instead, you begin to observe. You begin to listen. You begin to adjust. You stop waiting for the market to behave and start focusing on your own behavior. Because once you accept that the market is never wrong, you free yourself from the toxic attachment to prediction. You stop using the market as a stage upon which your ego performs, and you begin using it as the source of feedback that guides your decisions. This is the beginning of humility, and humility is the soil in which professionalism grows. When you stop insisting on being right, you open the door to thinking in probabilities. You begin to see trades not as verdicts on your intelligence, but as expressions of statistical expectancy. A single loss loses its emotional weight. A single win loses its intoxicating power. You detach from individual outcomes. because you understand they are merely iterations in a much larger distribution. Livermore believed that the moment a trader becomes emotionally invested in being right, that trader is already defeated. The need to be right narrows your perception, distorts your interpretation of price, and turns the market from an objective environment into a battlefield controlled by your biases. But when you release that need, when you accept that the market will do what it will do, you unlock the psychological neutrality required to execute with clarity. This is where professionalism begins. Not in strategies, not in indicators, not in predictions, but in surrendering your ego to the truth that the market holds the final word. The professional is not a prophet. He is a listener. He is a participant in the unfolding probability of price, not its architect. When you live by Livermore's first rule, the entire world of trading begins to reorganize itself. The noise quiets, the panic dissolves, the urgency fades. You no longer chase the market, you wait for it. You no longer interpret losses as failure, you interpret them as information. You no longer force your will onto the chart, you align your actions with what the chart reveals. The market is never wrong, but you might be, and accepting that possibility is the first true step toward mastery. Rule 2, big moves require big patience. There is a quiet cruelty to trading that few speak openly about. It is not found in the losses, nor in the false breakouts, nor even in the sudden reversals that steal gains in seconds. No, these are merely the surface, level pains. The deeper struggle, the one that leaves its mark on every trader's psyche, is far more subtle. The hardest part of trading isn't analysis. It's waiting for the setup, waiting for the alignment, waiting for confirmation, waiting for the trend to reveal whether it intends to carry you or discard you. The space between your decision and the market's response is the space where emotional storms gather. It is here, between intention and outcome, that the human mind begins to unravel. Jesse Livermore noticed this long before trading became digitized, long before charts glowed from screens, long before data ticked in fractions of a second. He watched beginners crowd the bucket shops, feverishly scanning the tape for signs of action. They treated trading as a hunt for entries, as if the market rewarded activity rather than discipline. But Livermore learned early that the money was not in finding trades. It was in sitting with them. Men who can both be right and sit tight are uncommon, he once said, and that sentence carries more truth than entire libraries on speculation. Beginners obsess over entries because entries feel like control. They feel like accomplishment. They offer a brief moment of certainty in a field where certainty does not exist. But professionals know that entries are merely introductions. What matters, the real substance, the real power, is found in what comes next. A trade is like planting a seed. Nothing happens at first. It sits beneath the soil, unseen, unresolved, vulnerable. But growth does not respond to impatience. You cannot dig up the soil every 5 minutes to check if the seed is sprouting. You must allow it to do its work in silence. Yet amateurs do this emotionally with every trade they place. The moment a candle wavers, their confidence shakes. The moment a pullback forms, their minds spiral. Normal volatility becomes a threat. Noise becomes meaning. They watch each tick with hypervigilance, misinterpreting nature's simple turbulence as a sign of failure. And so they cut the trades that were destined to succeed, not because the setup failed, but because their patience did. Livermore understood that volatility is not the enemy. Impatience is. The market never promised smooth movement. A trend breathes. It expands and contracts. It tests conviction. It shakes off the unprepared so that only the disciplined remain. The beginning of a big move rarely feels like a big move. Only in hindsight does it appear obvious, but in real time, it feels fragile, uncertain, easily dismissed. This is where patience becomes a philosophy rather than a tactic. Patience is not passive. It is not sitting idly by, hoping the market rewards you. It is active alignment with price. It is the commitment to remain present without interfering. It is the psychological discipline of allowing the market to unfold at its own pace, rather than demanding that it move at yours. Livermore often said that his biggest profits came from the trades he held, long after others had grown uncomfortable. Most traders, he believed, had the correct idea but the wrong endurance. They wanted the market to validate them quickly. They wanted instant gratification. They wanted linearity in a world built on fluctuation. But the market does not move in straight lines. Neither does human growth. Neither does mastery. The irony of trading is that amateurs think patience is merely about waiting for the right entry, when in truth, patience is about enduring the life of the trade once it begins. It is about surviving your own mind. It is about resisting the urge to manage fear instead of managing risk. When Livermore entered a position he believed in, he sat, not with arrogance but with clarity. He had waited for alignment, structure, confirmation strength, and once the conditions were right, he allowed probability to breathe. He knew that the market's greatest gifts were given not to those who moved quickly, but to those who refused to flinch in the face of noise. Patience is the antidote to emotional attachment. It is the antidote to fear. It is the antidote to the illusion of control. Because when you are patient, you accept that you do not control the pace of the market. You do not dictate how quickly a trend matures. You do not command volatility. You do not architect the candle formations. The only thing you control is your ability to stay aligned with the conditions you have chosen to trade. Patience frees you from the tyranny of immediacy. It shifts your thinking from moment to moment reactivity to broader probabilistic awareness. You are no longer seduced by every fluctuation. You no longer contort yourself emotionally at each pullback. You no longer sabotage trades that simply needed time. Time to build momentum. Time to absorb liquidity. Time to reveal themselves. A big move is not merely a market phenomenon. It is a test of identity. To catch it, you must be willing to become the kind of trader who can hold it. Livermore grew into that trader because he recognized that sitting required more strength than entering. It required neutrality, humility, and a deep acceptance that randomness is part of the journey, not an interruption. It required releasing the need for control and embracing the truth that markets operate on their own schedule. And when you learn to sit, truly sit, not anxiously, not resentfully, but with calm attentiveness, you discover that the market does not reward speed. It rewards patience refined into discipline. Big moves require big patience. Because before the market can stretch, you must. Rule 3. Your biggest enemy is always inside the room if you spend enough time around traders, whether in old bucket shops, modern trading floors, or online communities. You begin to notice a recurring fantasy, the belief that someone out there is responsible for their losses. Market makers, high-frequency algorithms, shadowy institutions, whales in dark pools. Every era invents its own villains. The costumes change, the vocabulary evolves, but the fear remains unchanged. Traders search for an external enemy to blame, because confronting the internal one requires a level of honesty that feels almost unbearable. But Jesse Livermore never indulged this illusion. He had seen too much, lost too much, learned too much to believe that the battlefield was anywhere other than within the trader himself, and so he stated the truth with unshakable clarity. The real threat is internal, not the market makers, not the news, not the algorithms. Your greatest enemy lives inside the room with you and inside your mind. Livermore knew that the forces that sabotage traders are not technological but psychological. Markets shift, but human nature does not. The impulses that ruin a trader come from within. Your fear of losing before you've even lost. Your hunger to win before the opportunity is real. Your addiction to activity because sitting still feels like weakness. Your need to feel in control in an environment built on uncertainty. These impulses whisper with deceptive charm. They speak in the language of urgency. Do something. Enter now, exit now, double down. Don't miss out. And the amateur, unaware of the danger, hands them the controls. Livermore often described the mind as a cockpit, an environment designed for precision, yet easily hijacked by emotion. Every impulse is a pilot trying to grab the yoke. Fear lunges for the controls. The moment a trade dips a point, Greed tries to take over the second a candle extends. Impatience rattles the cockpit incessantly, demanding action even when the conditions are not ready. And if fear flies the plane, you crash. If greed flies the plane, you also crash. If impatience flies the plane, you may not crash immediately, but you drift off course until disaster becomes inevitable. A professional trader understands this implicitly, and so he takes a radical approach. He grounds every emotional pilot. No feelings are allowed to fly the plane. No impulses are allowed to dictate action. He does not fly by hope or by fear. He flies by rules. Rules are the only language the market respects. They are the only barrier between you and your worst impulses. They are the only anchor strong enough to hold you steady during storms. Livermore built his rules not from theory, but from the scars of experience. He lost fortunes because he allowed emotion to override logic. He made mistakes when he let excitement distort his judgment. He rushed trades when his ego convinced him he had a gift for predicting the future. And each time he discovered, not gently but brutally, that the market is indifferent to the emotional drama unfolding inside a trader's mind. Once he realized this, everything changed. He understood that self-mastery is market mastery. There is no difference between the two. Control over your actions determines your longevity. Control over your psychology determines your profitability. Control over your impulses determines whether you trade your strategy or your fears. When you internalize this truth, the entire landscape of trading simplifies. It does not become easier, but it becomes clearer. You stop searching for external culprits because you realize they were never the problem. You stop trying to outsmart the market because you recognize that your real task is to outsmart your own primitive responses to uncertainty. You realize that no setup, no matter how clean, how structured, how textbook, perfect, can survive the distortion of a chaotic mind. A brilliant strategy placed in the hands of an undisciplined trader becomes worthless. A simple strategy placed in the hands of a stable, rule-driven trader becomes powerful. Livermore would say that the moment you stop fighting the market and begin fighting your impulses, everything changes. You become calmer, clearer, more deliberate. You stop needing the market to validate you. You stop entering out of restlessness. You stop exiting out of panic. You stop attaching emotional meaning to random fluctuations. Your trades begin to reflect intelligence instead of insecurity. Your exits begin to reflect logic instead of fear. Your decisions begin to reflect alignment instead of impulse. And this shift, this internal reorientation, is the beginning of mastery, because mastery is never external. It is never about predicting price or conquering volatility. It is about conquering yourself. Every great trader eventually makes this realization. The market doesn't beat you. You beat yourself, or you master yourself. And the market bows to that mastery, not in obedience, but in clarity. You start to see the market not as an enemy, but as a mirror. It reflects your strengths, your weaknesses, your blind spots. And when you finally recognize that the only adversary worth battling is the one in the mirror, you gain access to the calm, focused, rule-driven mindset that separated Livermore from the crowds who blamed everything except their own impulses. Every setup is only as strong as the mind executing it. And once you understand that, once you embody it, you begin the transformation from emotional participant to intentional professional. Rule 4. Never argue with a trend Jesse Livermore made and lost fortunes over the course of his life. But when he reflected on the trades that built his legacy, the trades that shaped him, defined him, and carved his name into market history, he traced them all back to a single act of unwavering loyalty. He aligned himself with the dominant trend, not occasionally, not when it was convenient, not when it felt comfortable, but always. This rule was not born from theory. It was born from experience, the harsh kind. Livermore had tasted the bitter consequences of fighting the prevailing direction, the kind of losses that don't just remove capital but also strip away illusions. He realized that the market's trend is not simply a path of price. It is the sum of collective psychology, the gravitational force generated by millions of decisions converging into one voice. To argue with that voice is to argue with the tide. and the tide does not care about your conviction. Human beings crave certainty. They crave the feeling of being early, of catching the turning point before the world sees it. There is a seductive thrill in imagining oneself at the exact moment the market shifts, from bullish to bearish or the opposite. But Livermore knew better. He knew that the market does not pay for bravado or cleverness. It does not pay for heroic attempts to catch tops or bottoms. It does not reward the ego that longs to be the first. The market pays for direction. It pays for alignment. It pays for the ability to ride, not predict. Livermore would watch traders insist on calling reversals simply because they believed the trend had gone too far. They treated extensions as evidence rather than behavior. They saw exhaustion where there was only momentum. They mistook discomfort for insight, believing their emotional fatigue was the market's fatigue. But markets do not reverse because traders feel tired. When you place a trade against the trend, you are not just disagreeing with price. You are disagreeing with the psychological weight of the entire market. You are stepping in front of a force composed of billions of dollars, executed by institutions, funds, algorithms, and countless participants who collectively form a wave too large for any individual opinion to redirect. Livermore compared it to swimming upstream while tied to a boulder. You may make initial progress. You may even feel proud about moving a few inches against the current. But the river does not care. The river will outlast you. The river will decide the outcome. Not your strength, not your analysis, not your hopes, and not your stubborn loyalty to a contrarian viewpoint. And when the boulder sinks, it drags you with it. Livermore learned to stop romanticizing contrarian entries and instead embrace the simplicity of trend alignment. Riding a trend was not only more profitable, it was psychologically liberating. When the tide carries you, you do not have to fight every tick. You do not have to justify every fluctuation. You do not have to negotiate with the noise. You are moving with the market, not against it. And that alignment creates emotional silence, a clarity impossible to attain when you are positioned on the wrong side of momentum. You stop resenting volatility. You stop overreacting to pullbacks. You stop viewing every candle as a threat. The trend absorbs the emotional burden for you. It gives context to movement. It converts uncertainty into expectation. Livermore said that the easiest money he ever made came from trends that had already revealed themselves. All he had to do was obey. But the hardest money, the most painful, the most costly, came when he ignored his own rule and attempted to defy the direction staring him in the face. He eventually understood that a trend is not just a chart pattern. It is a psychological truth. When millions of minds agree on direction, their collective behavior creates a force that cannot be reasoned with. It can only be respected, but most traders struggle to respect it. Their inner dialogue tells them, it can't go higher, it shouldn't go lower, it's extended, it's overbought, it's oversold. They think in terms of what the market must do, should do, or will do. Livermore trained himself to think only in terms of what the market is doing, because what the market is doing is reality, and everything else is speculation. To trade against the trend is to impose your expectations on a force infinitely larger than you. To trade with the trend is to surrender ego and adopt humility, to align with what is rather than what you wish it to be. There is a profound psychological shift that happens when you stop fighting the market and begin flowing with it, where you stop arguing and start listening. Trade with the tide, never against it. This rule has survived every crash, every bubble, every revolution in technology, because it is not a technical rule, it is a psychological inevitability. To obey it is to align with the deepest truths of market behavior, and if content like this deepens your understanding of trading psychology, if it helps you see the market with more clarity, more humility, and more alignment, give this video a like. It tells me you want more long-form, high-level psychological frameworks just like this. Content that doesn't just teach trading, but transforms the trader. Rule 5. The biggest losses come from adding to losing trades. There is a trading sin so ancient. It predates modern markets, predates candlestick charts, predates even the formal exchanges themselves. It is a temptation woven into the fabric of human psychology. The illusion that one can rescue a bad decision. by throwing more commitment, more capital, more stubborn belief into it. This sin has destroyed more accounts than bear markets ever will. It has humbled traders who once felt invincible. It has taken promising careers and ground them into dust, and Jesse Livermore, having suffered its consequences early in his life, eventually forbade it with the force of a moral law: never add to a losing trade. Not once, not ever. Not under the illusion of strategy, nor under the disguise of conviction. Livermore learned this the hard way. He remembered vividly the numbness that comes from watching a small mistake expand into a crisis, slowly at first, then with violent acceleration. A losing position whispers at you. It tells you that the market is overreacting, that the pullback is temporary, that if you just add a little more size, you can fix the trade. The impulse feels logical, it feels intelligent, it feels strategic, but it is none of those things. It is denial dressed as discipline. It is hope masquerading as risk management. It is ego demanding validation at any cost. Livermore eventually saw the truth. When you add to a losing trade, you are not increasing your position. You are increasing your emotional load. Your size grows, but your clarity shrinks. Your exposure rises, but your neutrality collapses. Your trade becomes louder, heavier, more personal. You are no longer trading the market. You are trading your fear of being wrong. This is why averaging down is not a technique. It is a psychological surrender. It is the trader abandoning process for emotion, abandoning objectivity for attachment, abandoning patience for desperation. And once that shift happens, the loss is no longer measured in dollars. It becomes measured in mental exhaustion. Livermore called these hope trades, and to him, they were poison. He observed that hope is the most expensive emotion in the market, more costly than greed, more destructive than fear. Hope convinces you to ignore structure. Hope convinces you that your opinion is more valuable than price action. Hope convinces you that adding size to a losing position is an act of courage rather than an act of delusion. But the market does not respond to hope. It responds to reality, and reality, when ignored, punishes swiftly. Professionals understand this in their bones. They cut losing trades quickly and cleanly, not because they enjoy taking losses, but because they understand what happens when those losses grow roots. A small loss is a tuition payment, a cost of doing business in a probabilistic environment. It is a lesson, a checkpoint, a recalibration. A big loss, however, is trauma. It leaves a mark on your psyche. It warps your decision, making it imprints fear into your future trades. IT show confidence in your edge, your process, your identity as a trader. Livermore refused to allow trauma into his trading life ever again. After learning this rule, he cut losses without negotiation, without narrative, without hesitation. He accepted that being wrong was inevitable, but staying wrong was optional. And this is the key difference between amateurs and professionals. Amateurs believe they can control the outcome. Professionals focus on controlling the damage. Averaging down is the amateur's attempt to rewrite the market's verdict. But the market has already spoken. Price reveals truth. Adding size does not change truth. It only increases the cost of denying it. When you refuse to average down, you are not being cautious. You are being powerful. You are declaring, my process matters more than my ego. My discipline matters more than this trade. My long-term consistency matters more than short-term discomfort. This rule is a psychological safeguard, a boundary that protects you from the single most destructive impulse in speculation. It reminds you that the goal is not to win every trade, but to protect your capital and your emotional stability so you can execute the next trade with clarity. And if you've ever turned a small mistake into a catastrophe by averaging down, you know exactly how painful this lesson can be. Sometimes it takes only one experience, one runaway loss, one emotional implosion, to burn this rule into your consciousness forever. So I'm curious, when did you learn that lesson? Drop a comment and tell me, because every trader's story of that moment carries wisdom. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because the next rules will shape you into a calmer, sharper, more resilient trader. one who navigates the markets with the psychological armor that Livermore spent a lifetime developing. Rules 6 and 7 only add to winners and always protect yourself in the final stretch of his career. Jesse Livermore often spoke of two rules that existed in perfect tension, paired principles that formed the equilibrium at the heart of every professional trading campaign. He called them his twin anchors, the quiet forces that kept him grounded when the seas grew rough and the market's emotional winds threatened to sway even the strongest mind. These rules were simple, but they carried the weight of lifetimes. Rule 6, add only to winning positions. Rule 7, always protect yourself from your own humanity. They appear straightforward at first glance, almost obvious, but the wisdom inside them is layered, and it transforms a trader only when understood not intellectually, but deeply, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. For Livermore, they were not techniques or tactics. They were a philosophy of survival and opportunity woven into one. Rule 6, add only to winners. Livermore believed that strength reveals truth. When a position moves in your favor, it is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is not random noise aligning temporarily with your opinion. It is confirmation, evidence that your thesis aligns with the market's underlying behavior. Strength is honesty. Weakness is deceit. When you add to a losing trade, you reinforce denial. When you add to a winning trade, you reinforce truth. Livermore scaled his positions only when the market proved, through price action, that momentum was real. Not theoretical, not anticipated, not hoped for, but real. He waited for the market to step toward him before he stepped deeper into it. He believed that until the market validated his conviction, he had no right to increase exposure. For him, adding to winners was not greed. It was strategy. It was the mathematical embodiment of trading in harmony with probability. When the wind is at your back, you spread your sails. When it pushes against you, you tighten them. Momentum is the closest thing to honesty the market ever offers. A dealer who keeps raising the stakes is telling you something. The odds are shifting, and a professional listens. This is the act of reinforcing strength, of rewarding correctness. Only after correctness is demonstrated. It is the antithesis of ego-driven trading. It is humility in motion, discipline in practice. Rule 7, always protect yourself. The seventh rule is the counterweight, the guardian, the reminder that even in moments of alignment, victory, and clarity, the greatest risk is always the same. Livermore understood that no matter how skilled a trader becomes, no matter how seasoned, disciplined, or insightful, he remains human. And humans make mistakes. They misread markets. They chase illusions. They get tired, emotional, distracted, overconfident. They drift from their rules for reasons that feel rational at the time, but turn irrational the moment the market disagrees. Livermore was honest about this in a way most traders aren't. He never claimed mastery over emotion. He claimed mastery over risk because he understood that emotion can never be fully conquered, but it can be contained. Rule 7 is about humility. It's about acknowledging human fragility in an environment that punishes it without mercy. This rule demands that your risk remains small enough to absorb the full weight of your own imperfection. Livermore knew survival was everything. It was the real edge because survival compounds. Survival learns, survival sharpens, survival evolves. If you survive, the upside reveals itself, not always immediately, but inevitably. The trader who protects himself lives long enough to witness the power of his edge. The trader who ignores protection never gets to finish the story. The paradox of mastery, these last two rules, create a beautiful paradox, one that defines the soul of professional trading. You scale with confidence, but you survive with humility. You grow aggressively when the market validates you, and you defend conservatively in the face of your own humanity. This is the balance point where amateurs transform into professionals. This is where the emotional rollercoaster ends and the craft begins. This is where trading shifts from chaos to structure, from fear to neutrality, from ego to alignment. Livermore realized that his greatest victories came from leaning into strength, positions that blossomed because he nurtured them with discipline, patience, and size. But his longevity came from self-protection, from acknowledging that one catastrophic loss, born from pride or carelessness, could erase the efforts of years. He built a life on the idea that opportunity is expansive but survival is sacred. To add to winners, while protecting your downside, is to live in the tension of two opposing forces, confidence and humility, and learn to let them coexist. This tension is not a flaw. It is the essence of mastery. It is the heartbeat of every great trading campaign. When a trader learns these final rules, truly learns them not just mentally but emotionally, they stop trying to conquer the market. They start flowing with it. They stop seeking perfect predictions. They start seeking aligned behavior. They stop treating trading as a series of opinions and start treating it as a disciplined dance with uncertainty. You scale when the market invites you in. You protect when your humanity reminds you who you are. And between those poles, consistency is born. The journey ends here, but the craft begins here. These twin rules are not the final step. They are the doorway. The doorway into professionalism, into emotional neutrality, into survival and expansion, into the version of yourself that Livermore spent a lifetime trying to reach.